for you to participate. As well as at the end of the meeting, we will have some discussion about next steps and actions that we could be taking. I ask your indulgence. This is our first meeting of the season, and we're trying to get all the technology working properly. It is hybrid. We have people on Zoom, and we are here as well. And those of you who have been here for a while, you know we've been struggling. Better? No? Okay, thank you. Hello? Yeah. Does this work?
Yep.
Okay. Mike.
Speak for half an hour or just off the top of it.
Let me know when you want me to connect.
And we're going to focus on early childhood learning, which is so important in preparing our children for kindergarten and beyond.
Thank you. health and reproductive health. And I think Dana Clark and perhaps Judy Greenberger are on Zoom. Did either of you have something you'd like to say about health? Okay. And then social policy, Jacqueline McMiller is working on social policy, and it includes a number of issues, including affordable housing, gun safety, and returning citizens. Jacqueline, would you like to say a few words about what you're working on?
Legal development laws have been invested for some of housing. And we know housing is a huge issue. So if there's anyone here that is interested, dedicated, expertly on to ensure that interested, we're looking for someone to speak up and advocate for those who have no
voice. For those of you who are on Zoom, can you please mute yourselves if you're not already muted? Thank you. And thank you, Jacqueline. So we have other leaders here today. Eileen Conroy is first vice president and responsible for public relations and communications. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Just that people on Zoom.
Okay, so those on Zoom, we will be using the mic, which is now working better than it was before. Okay, let me just introduce the other leaders. You probably met Anna Callwood, who was one of the at the registration table. She is our treasurer. Stacia Arcaris is secretary. Stacia, raise your hand. And second vice president Carolyn Moore is not here today. Is she on Zoom? Do we know? Okay. So we also have some other leaders, voter registration. Jerry Ware is responsible for that, and Sue Osen coordinates Observer Corps, which is our league members watching government agencies and reporting to the board and then to our members on items of special interest, so that we have timely information and can take action when necessary or support activities. And we are beginning to prepare for the 2024 election season. We will be having voter information in a voter guide, as well as candidate forums for that. And we will be, especially among our members, looking for volunteers for that. And we'll be counting on all of you to assist us with developing questions for those activities. Amy Wolf is in the director. And if you are not currently a member and would like to join, please do so. She has information on that. And as some of you may have seen, we are actively involved in collecting petitions, both on clean water and on abortion rights. And we do have those petitions here today. And thank you for the clean water people who are in the to my far left corner, who will be happy to have you sign up, as well as to take petitions to get others to contribute. And the abortion rights petitions are on the table in front. So thank you for that. Any other leaders who would like to make some comments before we move into our program?
Sandy, can you hear me?
Is that Claire Ann?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am in charge of the director for the environment. And I would like to ask if anyone is interested in joining. Please get in contact with me either by email or telephone. Right now, I'm have contacted Win Meverham at Florida Gulf Coast University, as well as the ag community at Gulf Coast University. I am sitting in on the all-phase climate action team, which is addressing climate change as well as natural resources for Lee County. Also sitting in on the Reset organization, where they have very interesting Zoom meetings. Last week, the Zoom meeting included 3 tribal activists from the Seminole and the Miccosukee tribe. And you will also be able to work with the League of Women Voters of Florida on any legislation that comes before the Florida legislature. So again, if you're interested, please email me, which is cagrammy3@gmail.com, or my phone number is 239-560-9379. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire Ann. Any other leaders or anyone else who would like to comment about League program? Okay, at this time, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Codty Pierce, who is the Calusa Waterkeeper, is a lifelong resident of the Caloosahatchee watershed. He grew up along one of its many tributaries, and that helped to shape his passion, love, and admiration for the area's history and biodiversity. This complex ecosystem that has supported flourishing civilizations longer than written record has been a natural inspiration to him. While growing up in the community, Codty's early background in reptiles, wetland restoration, and native plant landscaping, coupled with a career as a professional fishing guide, has created a unique collage of infield experiences across local uplands, wetlands, estuaries, and nearshore Gulf waters. To protect and restore the Caloosahatchee River from Lake Okeechobee to coastal waters is the mission. And in Codty, you will find the passion to unite and protect this special watershed. And I thank Codty for participating today. And it was my first opportunity to meet him, but the League has worked with Calusa Waterkeeper in the past, and we hope to continue to do so. So Codty, would you like to come up here? And we had agreed we'll try to share, trade out signs here. So we'll try to do that. And here's your clicker.
Okay, you can leave your sign up there. I think.
You're okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. How are you? Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to you guys today. It's a beautiful Saturday as we're getting into fall, so I'm happy to kick off the speaking season with this being the first engagement. So, where's the clicker? Right here. All righty. So we'd like to start off. We're going to go over our agenda for this morning. We're going to go over a little bit about Calusa Waterkeeper, as well as issues in our watershed with Lake O, homegrown problems, and some solutions. Let's see, which way do I click? Oh, this way. Got it. Okay. All right. So we're going to start with a little bit about Calusa Waterkeeper. We are a Fort Myers based nonprofit organization dedicated to the protection of the Caloosahatchee River and estuary from Lake Okeechobee to nearshore waters. Calusa Waterkeeper began in 1995 as the Caloosahatchee River Watch Association. And then in December 2016, we achieved full member status in the Waterkeeper Alliance, adopting the new name Calusa Waterkeeper. This is what makes up most of Florida's waterkeepers. So all the way up in Tallahassee, we start with the Emerald Coast Waterkeeper, Suwannee, Tampa Bay, Suncoast, Calusa, Collier Waterkeeper, Miami Waterkeeper, Lake Worth, Indian Riverkeeper, St. John's Riverkeeper, and Matanzas. So most of our tributaries in Florida now are covered underneath a Waterkeeper Alliance, and each group is dedicated to their community. But collectively, we are a part of the Waterkeeper Alliance, which is a global entity. All right. So being inside of this alliance with the waterkeepers across the globe, we cover some 2.6 million square miles of waterway combined. There are over 300 waterkeeper groups that are across the nation, around 348 if we include other countries. We are in 45 plus countries, and we have over 1.1 million volunteers collectively and supporters worldwide. So this is a big deal for us because, you know, we're the largest and fastest growing nonprofit solely focused on clean water. We preserve and protect water by connecting local waterkeeper groups worldwide.
Just a little bit.
Not sure I can, but I'll try.
All right, so we'll go over some of our goals. Our goals for our watershed is first to improve water quality, restore ecosystems, and protect human health, to promote public education about water quality in Southwest Florida, as well as to monitor water quality with the help from our volunteers, which we call rangers, and inform the public of the results, as well as advocate for water quality to our institutions and leaders. We're going to start to go into a couple of our issues that we experience here locally. We're going to start with the lake with a little bit of background. So Lake Okeechobee and the river system is pretty unique. For those that don't know, Lake O used to flow south in a sheet flow style that supported the Everglades with inundation of fresh water and nutrients that came from the Kissimmee River Valley all the way down through Florida Bay. The Caloosahatchee River was excavated into a canal to drain Lake Okeechobee in 1887 to prevent the southern flow of water. So that way the land around the lake could be farmed, as well as supporting the shipping methods at the time. So before rail became the primary shipping method in Florida, the state was looking for ways that they could increase transportation in a quicker time manner. And the Caloosahatchee was the first one to undergo dredging operations to create a quicker path across the state to go up the Atlantic seaboard to get produce and livestock and other commodities to the northern markets. So this initial start of dredging is what kind of set in place some of the water quality issues that we're experiencing today. Naturally, from Lake Okeechobee westerly through the Caloosahatchee, there was a land bridge somewhere around LaBelle. So we're talking about a 3 or 4 foot limestone waterfall, for lack of a better term. This waterfall is what separated the saline estuary from the freshwater inundation from the lake. They dynamited this out so that way they could dredge it and continue to move vessels west to east. And this is what started some of our issues. So once they dredged the river, it created the perfect highway to discharge fresh water from the lake to get it out to the coastline and drain the uplands that were south of Lake Okeechobee, which is currently Clewiston. Following the devastating hurricane, a dike was built to raise the south edge of the lake in the 1940s, completely cutting off water flow to the Everglades. So this is the dike that we know now as the Herbert Hoover Dike. This is something that has always had ongoing maintenance to it, and currently they just finished projects last year, and this has increased the lake's holding capacity now another foot. So currently we're around 15 and a half feet right now in the lake. The Army Corps is doing a good job of trying to maintain flows, and part of the way that they can limit, you know, some of the discharges that we experience on our coast as well as the East Coast is to hold more water. Now that we're going into somewhat of the dry season, hopefully the lake will be able to retain that level of water and we won't have to experience too many damaging discharges. So next we're going to go into consequences. So we're going to talk about the destruction of estuaries. With this water that's coming from Lake Okeechobee, since it's been fast-tracked now into a drainage system, so to speak, we're going to start to talk about some of the issues that are at hand. So estuaries are always changing seasonally with daily tides. However, each species has a tolerance zone, and each area has a tolerance zone on how much freshwater inundation can be experienced, and then the amount of time that the water is actually in place at that time. Using the Caloosahatchee to drain water from Lake Okeechobee hurts our local ecosystems in a couple of ways. First, it's too much or too little fresh water kills oysters, grass, and larvae of aquatic species. So most of our game fish and a lot of our commercially harvested species call our coastline and the river home. This is a nursery habitat for them. So once we start to affect the salinity and the hydrological flow of this area, has a profound impact on the actual biomass of what we have on our coastline as well as the Gulf of Mexico. I highlight this nutrient-rich water carries and accelerates algae blooms into canals and estuaries. This is something that we'll touch base on in a couple of slides. Just like to highlight it is because it is one of the greatest issues that we face is nutrient transportation. All right, so the first consequence is one that we've all experienced this past summer, as well as the summer of 2018, and that's the blue-green algae blooms. So historically, wetlands filtered and cleaned water flowing across the land. Without that natural filtration, algae are next in line to benefit from nutrients. So what we mean by that is that when you have a major system like Lake Okeechobee or the Kissimmee River Valley, there are natural nutrients that are found there, as well as unnatural that come from maybe livestock, failing infrastructure for septic systems. Once this water picks up those nutrients, it carries it like a highway out to our end. So now that we've altered the natural flow and increased the speed in which the water flows, we take away the natural opportunity for wetlands to actually retain those nutrients, process them, and then lower the amount of nitrates that end up on the actual saline side of our ecosystem. Blue-green algae lives in freshwater and brackish water canals, rivers, and estuaries, but it's predominantly a freshwater-based algae. And as this algae is transported all the way out of Lake Okeechobee and reaches some of our higher nutrients water that's retained in the river is when we see the parameters for a super bloom. So as the earth is experiencing higher temperatures, increased UV, it causes, or at least allows, the perfect growing medium for plant-based to thrive. Algae is a single cellular organism, so it's able to metabolize nutrients in a much quicker fashion than most aquatic plants. Therefore, that's one of the reasons that we see algae on blooms on such a large level now. These algae blooms create toxins that harm wildlife and humans. So this is known as a cyanotoxin that we experience from the blue-green algae, and in particular, microcystin is the one that we are most interested in. Another consequence is one that we're all familiar with as well, is red tide. So red tide is a saltwater algae that is naturally found. There are historic counts dating back to the 1800s, but it is increasing in scope, intensity, and distribution in recent years. So again, as Florida is undergoing these major land changes and diversion of water flows, we are seeing red tide on a larger scale, more predominantly than we have experienced in previous years. This acceleration is due in part to the nutrients from Lake Okeechobee that are discharged to our coast. This creates a dangerous toxin that harms humans, fish, and wildlife. We need to restore the natural water flows to have a healthy ecosystem, wildlife, and healthy area for us to live. So we can't blame Lake Okeechobee for everything. We hear all kinds of things about Lake Okeechobee. It is one of the largest influences to nutrients to our ecosystem, but we are part to blame for that. Now that we've been experiencing high rates of development in our area, and again, that we've altered the sheet flow, we end up getting more point sources from the accumulated mass of civilization that we experience now on a much more frequent basis. So we're going to go into a couple of pictures here for the next slides, and I'll kind of give you a brief description on these. This algae that you see here in this current photo is known as Dapis algae. So Dapis is one species of algae that is natural in the environment, but it becomes an issue for us because of the nutrients that are stored inside of the ecosystem. This algae takes advantage of the growing parameters as well as the nutrients, and then we see these large super blooms pictured here. These natural lagoons that are along our coastline, now that we've altered the sheet flow by development and diversion and ditches and canals, that nutrient seems to set inside of these lagoons. So we see a mass manipulation of this year after year. Another thing is that on the west coast of Florida, we are one of the largest beach renourishment projects in the entire world. Beach tourism is one of the biggest things that draw people to Florida, but this is also could be a potential contributor to this. So one thing I like to highlight here is you see some of the turbulence here from them doing the beach renourishment. This could have profound effects. It depends on where they're getting their substrate, whether they're dredging offshore, or in this particular case is taking sand mined from a pit. Some of the reason that this is a concern for us is that you're taking natural sediments that have been in the ground for thousands of years, that contain different types of nutrients. And then we put it right into the watershed, and then you can see some of the plumes that are coming out of here. So some of it could be a phosphate thing, some of it could be high levels of silicon, but it is not a natural event for us to be dredging from inland, placing that on the coastline. These are all types of influences that could cause us further problems. This image here is one that catches the eye pretty well. This past year, as well as years prior, we have experienced another large Dapis algae bloom in Matlacha. This is a couple of months prior Hurricane Ian. And what we're seeing here is the pigments that are leaching out of the Dapis algae looking like snow. Now, this Dapis algae is one that we see continue to manifest each year, and certain years are higher than others. But this year, with all the detritus that was broken down from the damage in the hurricane, we are seeing these large scale blooms taking place in late spring, early summer. This is another image here. These are the old pilings of where Burt's Bar in Matlacha used to be. This is a natural area that these nutrients have accumulated since we've put in place a land bridge east to west, which has slowed some of the sheet flow of the tidal shed inside of the area. And we've seen an accumulation of the algae taking advantage of those nutrients after the destruction. This is an image here on the eastern side of Charlotte Harbor. Here I am with Southwest Florida Conservancy. We took them out to do an article on one of the larger algae issues that doesn't come to light so often, but I like to talk about it in here because this isn't just an area that's specific like the Caloosahatchee River or outside of Sanibel, which seems to get the most amount of attention. We're seeing this high levels of nutrient loading all across our watershed now. The eastern portion of Charlotte Harbor is one that kind of falls to the leeway. It is at the extremities of Lee County and Charlotte County combined. So it's an area that most people don't normally look for this type of issue at hand. This area was also compounded by the hurricane. So as we know, hurricanes spin in a counterclockwise direction. So when the initial onset of the hurricane came, caused all the destruction like a cutting blade. Once all of the nutrients and plants and other contaminants were made into the water, that natural counterclockwise spin deposited all this nutrients on the eastern side of the harbor. And then now, as we went into summer, some 6 months after Hurricane Ian, moving on to current day now at a year, we've seen this nutrients manifest into yet another large scale algae bloom. One of the interesting things to note here is the different colorations of this algae mat. So what we have here is different levels, like week 1 of growth, week 2 of growth, week 3 of growth. And you get a really interesting perspective on how the algae can process the nutrients and then the natural deposits along the mainland here. So this is another one that comes from Pine Island. This is a holding pond for one of the communities on the island. I like to highlight this because this is a natural embankment here, but these are areas that are prone to hurricane storm surge inundation. As you can tell by the surface bloom here of algae, this is a concern for us because there is a potential for this to be introduced into the watershed, and it is one of many concerns that we have. So we're going to talk now about development. Development is outpacing conservation. We use Estero Bay as a good example, but Estero Bay is separate from the Caloosahatchee, but yet why is it in trouble? Across the county, we face many issues like stormwater runoff, impervious surfaces, lawn chemicals, golf course runoff, reclaimed water, retention lakes that don't work, like what we just showed you a couple slides ago, septic tanks, aging neighborhoods, and municipal waste treatment and infrastructure, as well as agriculture runoff. It's a classic tragedy of the commons. Everyone contributes a little bit and no one is responsible for the cleanup. This is a slide that really gets people's attention here. So this is showing the amount of development in Lake County in 1960. And the next slide is 2020. So as you can see here, we have such a large scale inundation of development that the amount of potential point sources for nutrient runoff has compounded by 300 times. Again, we'll go back one slide. This is 1960, 2020. So as we are continuing in time, you can see that we're going to be faced with different issues at hand as we have such a large metropolis now is what I call it. It's even more important now to be conscious of our impact on the environment as well as trying to be proactive. Each one of these, you know, some are on city sewer, but a lot of these, especially in the northern part of Cape Coral, not most of Pine Island, half of Pine Island, some other areas are still on septic systems. Uh-oh. All right. So another consequence here is water quality decline. One of our main things that we work on is FIB testing. So fecal indicator bacteria that make people sick or at unsafe levels in many of the waterways we all use and enjoy. This is a consequence of having a population so high as we do. The chance for likelihood of spillage, is much higher, as well as the nutrients that are processed through the drain field over time just compounds on a much higher level than we've seen before. Another thing that we talk about is seagrass. Seagrass is down to 4% of its historical range in Estero Bay. That is huge, 4%. What makes this issue a little bit more difficult for us is that as we leave a complex biodiverse ecosystem, we're being replaced by single cellular organisms, i.e. algae. Algae is one that can manifest nutrients in a much quicker fashion. It has higher abilities to process higher UV that we see across the board, as well as processing the nitrogen that's increased by 250% into our watershed. Restoration is needed to improve our ecosystem for both wildlife and humans to thrive. This is another example of some of the Dapis algae that we're experiencing in the harbor. As you can see here, this is towards the early end of its decomposing process, but we see this natural inundation of high amounts of sulfur, which is a release as the bacteria is deteriorating. This gas exchange is compounded on a high level, which is what causes a lot of our murky water conditions that we're experiencing in the harbor, as well as Matlacha. So now we'll talk about some of the solutions. So one of our larger projects that we work on is monthly water testing for FIB. So again, that's fecal indicator bacteria. Most of our sites across the county, we are testing for Enterococcus, which is the bacteria that's present in a saline type environment. We do have a couple of projects where we are testing for E. coli, which is a freshwater based. So in addition to that, we sample for HABs, which are harmful algae blooms, to monitor for the different types of toxins that are at hand. And this information is a free resource for the community that you can find on our website, as well as our monthly mailing list. And we have an example of our map here on the right-hand side. So we have about 25 base sites that we sample every month, as well as 7 new sites that we've incorporated after Hurricane Ian to try to get an idea of what is happening after the storm surge, high amounts of rain, and now that we're experiencing some higher tide levels as well. As you can see across the county, this is just one example. This was of August of this year, but the levels that are in purple here are super high levels of fecal bacteria. And for the most part, we see the same few key areas, a couple of older communities here in Estero Bay, and then also near and east of downtown Fort Myers, North Fort Myers are definitely the areas that we're experiencing higher than normal levels. All right, so now we'll talk about another impact program, and this is the air monitoring. So in 2021, we designed what we call the ATOM, which is an aerosol detector for algae monitoring, to sample air over a 24-hour period, simulating a person who lives by the water with algae present. And then we partnered with the brain chemistry labs to analyze the samples here. So this device basically its intake is set at what would be normal eye level for a human. It takes a sample over 24 hours of bringing in aerosolized air from around us through a water trap, which therefore traps any types of toxins that may be in the air. And then we already have our testing solution, which is the water. So it's a very cost-effective and efficient way for us to test for airborne toxins. We are proud that we are on the leading edge of science here. We are working to fill the gap in monitoring for algae toxins in the air. We are one of 2 entities that are really working on this. The Nantucket Waterkeeper is one of our partners, and now we're starting to see some other studies coming out of like the University of Miami. And this is something that we're trying to establish so we can figure out what the threshold is of what is safe and what isn't safe, as well as trying to identify cyanotoxins that are in the air across the county. We have detected toxins in both water and air samples, and we are testing to find a standard for safe levels of exposure. Currently, we're in the process right now of identification in our testing process, so we'll have another season of this. Once we can accumulate data, we can hand the data over to another entity, so that way there can be a standard for exposure. A growing body of research suggests that airborne algae toxins may affect human health, especially with chronic exposure linked to neurodegenerative diseases such as ALS. So this cyanotoxin is a neurological potential, and that's why we find it to be so important, and we want to be able to continue to document what we're finding as well as expanding our testing parameters. Another impact program is our Ranger Volunteer Program. So rangers are who sample the water every month. Again, we're sampling around 30 sites for fecal bacteria. We collaborate with other non-for-profits on restoration projects like SCCF and beach sweeps with Keep Lee County clear and beautiful. We do vertical oyster gardens as well, which is a really cool project that each oyster has the potential of filtering up to 50 gallons of water per day. So we're using what would end up in the landfill. We're using the recycled shells after restaurants sell the oysters to customers. Some of those shells would normally end up in the landfill as food waste, but we're able to collect those shells, keep them in the environment for a certain duration, so that way they can become sterilized through natural processes, sunlight, rain, insects, the whole 9 yards. And then we implement those oysters by drilling holes in them and configuring them on a rope. So it's a vertical oyster reef. And we are targeting man-made structures, so docks, canal systems, anywhere that we've already inconvenienced the ecosystem or manipulated it in some form. We are helping increase the amount of biodiversity in there, as well as cleaning the water. So this is a fun project for us to work on, as well as we're doing juvenile tarpon habitat mapping for BTT. Lee County is the tarpon capital of the world. It is a big part of our culture here. It really supports the economy. So we find that to be a very good project that fits into our parameters. And the potential for being able to set aside new areas that we do find to be important for tarpon in their nursery habitat, especially for the juveniles. There is the potential that we can add those to protective status if it's not already done. All right, so Calusa Waterkeeper, we believe that we're a resource for information. Please visit our website if you'd like to find out more information. These are some of the impact programs that we do to educate the community. So a couple of years ago, we've produced a couple of documentaries on some of the water quality issues at hand. These can be found on our website as well as our YouTube channel. If you have not seen these, I suggest that you take a look at them, as well as supporting the right to clean water. And these are some ways that you can support Calusa Waterkeeper. And we'll take some questions now, if that's okay. Yes.
What actual toxic chemicals are being released by the green algae? Because the neuro.
So yes. And so she was asking if we know what the chemicals are that are released by the decomposing blue-green algae that are neuro toxin. So we are looking for microcystin primarily. That's the most widely studied cyanotoxin currently, and that's the one of most question. It's microcystin. So the sulfur is part of almost all algae species as they decompose, release the sulfur as the cells rupture. And that's across the board with the algae that are present as they decompose. Yes.
And what's the difference between red tide?
Okay, so blue-green algae again is mostly a freshwater base cyanobacteria. Red tide is more of an algae that's present in the estuarine side. So it is a pelagic species that is found common, and it's usually on the seafloor. And then when the parameters are right, we see that start to go through the water column, and then it reacts very well to nitrogen. So whenever we have high amounts of discharge, usually if Carina breviaris is present, it will manifest that nitrogen, and then you start to see the harmful algae blooms as it manifests. Yes.
Question, I've been arguing that they did the test. Really very problematic. It's like high testing and what those numbers mean and what they consider as high and where does it come from?
Absolutely.
That particular area.
Yes. So she was asking about Billy's Creek area with the fib. So fecal indicator bacteria, anything over 35 most probable number. So we use MPN because there are multiple different types of bacteria that can be present inside of a water sample. So the current testing procedures that we're using is an indicator dye that reacts with the enzyme inside of that enterococcus. And so whenever that enzyme is found in there, that we get a glowing sensation inside of our testing quantitrays. And then when we read the quantitrays, each little square will light up. So there are a certain set, I believe it's 96 on our trays, and we count how many cells are actually lighting for that particular enzyme that's indicating that it's in the system. And that's where we get our base number, which comes out as NPN, which is most probable number. So anything over 35 is considered to be a high probability of getting sick. And so Billy's Creek has been one that we tend to see on a very high level, as he noted. It can come from a number of different backgrounds, but most primarily it's coming from septic type systems, failing infrastructure. It could come from an agriculture thing. If anybody has cows, if there's runoff of that sort, it can introduce it into the watershed.
So is there currently anything that works to get those levels down low or indicate what the problems are and find solutions?
Yes, absolutely. So a couple of years ago, before my time, Calusa Waterkeeper had been working on Billy's Creek. It's something that they've brought to the county before. It is still an ongoing project of ours. So we do focus on Billy's Creek and Manuel's Branch as far as our advocacy. We're looking for solutions to find funding to try to improve some of the infrastructure that's there. And it's still an ongoing project, especially as things are growing in the county. We would like to see more attention there, but it is one of two of our main focuses for our advocacy groups currently. Anyone else? Yes.
Yeah, my question is about the water quality.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to generally state for people to-
Mm-hmm. So Fort Myers Beach is tested by DOH. Department of Health is the one that sets out the fib indicators for the beach. They come out with those results, I think once a month is when they're published. For the most part, yes. There are times that we see fib numbers that go over the safety threshold. Currently, DOH says that those are coming from animal influences, i.e. birds. But during those times of high fib numbers, obviously it's not a recommended suggestion to be in the water at that point, because it does increase your likelihood of being sick. But for the most part, any of our tidal beaches are one of the safer bets because you do have that exchange of tidal influence. So there's usually not the parameters for it to manifest unless it's, special circumstances like we get Hurricane Idalia, did a lot of storm surge there, and then we saw the fib numbers rise after that. But for the most part, yes, the beaches are the cleaner, safer choice. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Manuals Branch is another one of our focus. So our two main advocacy and testing locations is Manuals Branch as well as Billy Creek. We are currently in the process now of increased testing in Manuals Branch, looking for potential point source. And we are expanding our FID testing to include E. coli because you do have a freshwater side of that once you get upstream of those lock systems around Fort Myers High School. So it is something that we are compiling the data now to bring forth. Absolutely. And it is a concern because Billy's Creek and Manuals Branch do have the longest track record for higher than normal levels. But we're also talking about two of the eldest communities that are in Fort Myers area. So we do have an issue of failing infrastructure. There could be issues of, natural, what I would call water wicking. So anytime you have an old creek bed or, natural discharge valley, that is automatically going to allow any type of stormwater runoff or sediments to make their way to the creek system through the natural horizontal process, even if it's in the soil. So those two areas are definitely focused points for us. And we do have a special group just focusing on trying to get the data set there and come up with solutions. Yes, ma'am.
For those of us who are clear about where those two places are.
Mhm. Absolutely. So both areas are going to be around Fort Myers city limits, and Manuals Branch is going to be on the western portion of Fort Myers. Its tidal influx is going to happen off of McGregor Boulevard just west of Edison Park, and it will go south of that all the way past Highway 41 for probably 3/4 of a mile. And then Billy's Creek will be on the eastern portion of downtown Fort Myers. Its river influence is going to happen at State Road 80 near the Oasis condo community where the drawbridge used to be on State Road 80. And then it goes all the way into East Fort Myers near, if you think of Luckett Road and Ortiz, would be its natural point source there. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. And that's a great question. So the first thing is going to seem kind of a no-brainer, but it's educating yourself on the issues at hand. We find that, the type of advocacy that you can do to your friends, your neighbors, and your peers has much more effect than someone else like myself up here preaching to you. So that's the first thing. Secondarily is take a look at your impact. If it's something to the extent of, high amounts of fertilizer for your yard, natural runoff that happens out of your yard, making sure if you are on septic that your septic is up to date. Those are some very large impacts that you can have to try to curb this issue. And I really go back to the first side is educating yourself. I mean, honestly, that peer influenced education really has a higher effect on the greater outcome of things than anything else. Yes, ma'am.
Billy's Creek.
I think it would give a lot more, it would definitely put a lot more pressure that we update our BMAPs. So a BMAP is known as a Basin Management Action Plan. And since we're part of the Western Everglades discharge system, an updated BMAP is something that we would really like to see. It's crucial for the existence of our economy, ecosystem, and biodiversity that we currently have. I think in my mind, that would have the highest impact, that we would have a better chance of having an actual valid BMAP for the current conditions right now. So currently the BMAP that's in place with the data that's used, it is apparent that we are definitely behind the ball on that. A BMAP is something that we have been calling for quite some time. And these basin management action plans are what take into account the amount of total daily loads that happen, the amount of stormwater runoff, the amount of flow that comes out of Lake Okeechobee, as well as the density and the impacts of density has on our watershed. So.
I think,
have Joe speak and then you
Good.
have more
Yep,
questions. at the end.
absolutely. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Cody. That really gives us a lot to think about and a lot to do. I wanted to stop now. You will have more time for questions later, but I wanted to make sure we had time for our second speaker. And I think some of your questions may be answered with Joe's presentation. Then we will have more opportunity for discussion and actions after his presentation. Joseph Bonasia is a retired teacher and currently serves as chair of the Florida Rights of Nature Network and Operation Communications Director of Florida Right to Clean Water. These two organizations are behind the campaign to amend our Florida Constitution with a fundamental right to clean water and clean and healthy waters. He also serves as Citizens Climate Lobby's volunteer liaison to Senator Rick Scott and is a founding member of Southwest Florida RECEP Center and is co-leading efforts to prevent the destruction of vital wetlands in Southwest Florida. So I will let Joe talk to you about his efforts that he has organized to have a constitutional amendment and other observations about Lee County. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. I do not have the same experience being a Floridian as does Cody. I lived the first 60 years of my life in Long Island, New York, spent a lot of time looking at the Atlantic Ocean, Long Island Sound as a kid, did a fair amount of fishing, boating, sailing, clamming. When I got older, fair amount of kayaking. I moved down to Cape Coral in 2016 to experience what I never, ever experienced up there. 2016, the end of an algal bloom, and then 2018, 2019, of course, the historic blue-green algae bloom and red tides, when literally tens of thousands of tons of sea life had to be hauled away from our shores. And coming down here, it was also new to me to realize that we were having water summits almost yearly being put on by the news press. Really? We need water summits? Everybody seems to be fighting for clean water, especially our politicians. Everyone who runs is going to fight for clean water. Who are you fighting? What are you fighting? And most importantly, how are you fighting? Because things aren't getting better. They're getting worse. Cody has just detailed a lot of our issues right down here. I'm not going to recover those. I just want to note that our issues aren't the only issues in the state. They are statewide. Well, let's skip all that. Let's skip that. That's the fecal. Okay. Loss of seagrass. We've had a tremendous amount, but certainly up in the Indian River Lagoon, they have lost 46,000 acres of seagrass in the last 12 to 13 years. That's why manatees are starving. At least it's a big, big part of it. And seagrass is a keystone species, excuse me. When it goes, other species go with it. We have about 1,000 springs in the state. 800 of them are impaired. According to the Florida Springs Council, super reputable organization, it could take 200 years, given current efforts, to clean those springs up. No state has more acres of polluted lake water than does Florida. No state has lost more acres of wetlands than have we. The system isn't working. What do? Write to our legislators, get on the phone. That has not produced the results we need. One of the primary reasons, not the only one, but one of the primary reasons the system isn't working, because here in Florida, special interests have undue influence over our legislators and therefore over our environmental policies. You can see that in our last legislative session. How did we end up getting the sprawl bill? Well, It's not a coincidence that we get that when 41% of our legislature is related to the real estate industry. How do we get that law that is going to enable the state to use radioactive toxic phosphogypsum in road construction? Big mining had a lot to do with that. We don't need to talk about the influence of big sugar on our water qualities down here, right? So I want to tell you about what happened in Orange County back in 2020. Those people, tired of their polluted waters, having lost faith in a regulatory system that's supposed to be protecting our waters and us, they took matters into their own hands. They put on their ballot a charter amendment for people to vote on. It proposed to give rights to all their waters within the county boundaries and to give all Orange County citizens a right to clean water. It passed. 89% of Orange County voters passed it, 9 out of 10. When the heck do 9 out of 10 Americans agree about anything? Well, they agreed about the importance of water. What happened? Between the time it was put on the ballot and the voters actually got to vote on it, our state legislature stepped in and they took those rights away even before the people approved them. They preempted the authority of local governments throughout the state to pass laws giving rights to nature and to pass laws giving Floridians any rights to any aspect of the natural world. How crazy is that? Why would they do such a thing? Money, yes, money, yes. Well, I would tell you that the legislator who sponsored that bill, excuse me, that preemption, by the way, it was tucked away in a paragraph or two in the 2020 Clean Waterways Act, which was supposed to clean up our waters. John Cassani back then predicted that that legislation would actually make things worse. And that is exactly what has happened. Well, in that 111-page document, they tucked away these 2 paragraphs. It was sponsored by a legislator who also happens to be a developer. He was elected as Legislator of the Year by the Florida Farm Bureau. We are not the only state that suffers from the problem of special interests having undue influence. So I want to tell you about a super important lawsuit that took place up in Pennsylvania back in 2011. Pennsylvania, big fracking state. I think everybody knows that. 2011, the state legislature approved and the governor signed into law a notorious piece of legislation known as Act 13. It would have compelled municipalities to allow fracking operations virtually anywhere anyone wanted to have it. Right next to a schoolyard, right next to a churchyard, right next to, or even in a wildlife sanctuary, and there would have been nothing that the municipalities could do about it, regardless of what their zoning laws were. It even came with a gag rule. Doctors were not allowed to talk publicly about the health impacts they were seeing in their patients. Doctors were not allowed to talk to other doctors to compare notes unless they signed off on some legal document, but everything was kept from the public knowing. Most of those legislators, or many of them, never read the legislation they approved. The governor accepted $1.7 million in campaign contributions. Unfortunately, this is the way the system works. Not all the time, but too often. So what happened? Much to the credit of these very brave municipalities, because they had a lot to lose. They would have been on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars if they lost. They filed a lawsuit. They contested the constitutionality of Act 13. And it went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And lo and behold, that court agreed with the municipalities. They said key provisions in Act 13 were in violation of Pennsylvania's constitutional rights. And that was mostly based on what Pennsylvania voters did back in 1972. They amended their state constitution. They gave themselves constitutional environmental rights. Wasn't big, wasn't long. The people have the right to clean air, pure water, and to the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. Most times, rulings for Supreme Court cases like this, they run about 20 pages. In this case, it was written by the Chief Justice. It took 162 pages to document the history of environmental degradation in Pennsylvania, going back to the timber industry, then the coal industry, leading up to the fracking industry, because he wanted to make a crucial point. He said, it is not a historic accident that the Pennsylvania Constitution now places citizens' environmental rights on par with their political rights. Pennsylvania citizens knew what they were doing. They deemed it absolutely necessary that their environmental right to clean air, clean water is just as important as other fundamental American rights, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms and such. Our liberty, our freedoms, our quality of life, just as important. We want to do what they did. Oh, I forgot something. This past summer in Montana, happy young people, there was a climate lawsuit. I imagine some of you are aware of that. There have been a whole bunch of youth climate lawsuits. None of them so far have been successful, except for this one. This one was different because they based their argument on the fact that in the Montana Constitution, all citizens have a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. And they had an atrocious law on the books that prevented their DEP from taking environmental consequences into consideration when thinking about permits to fossil fuel operations. The judge agreed with them. It was because they have these environmental constitutional rights. We want what Pennsylvanians have, what Montanans have, and most recently what New Yorkers have given themselves. So what does our Constitution say, by the way? It says, it shall be the policy of the state to conserve and protect its natural resources and scenic beauty. That is not the explicit statement of a fundamental right. That's a policy. Policies come and go. Our access, our dependence on clean water cannot be at the whim of who happens to be in office or what political party is in control. We need something much more stable. Adequate provision shall be made by law for the abatement of air and water pollution. Has adequate provision been made? No. Obviously, many times people say, don't we already have lots of laws on the books to protect our waters? If we did, our waters wouldn't be in the condition they are in. Somebody would be using them in order to clean up our waters. We need something more. So, if we are successful in qualifying this proposed amendment for the 2024 ballot, and you walk into the voting booth, this is what you will read. This amendment creates a fundamental right to clean and healthy waters. The key word there is fundamental. There are different levels of rights. Again, fundamental rights are the highest ones. That's important because that means they would take precedence. Our fundamental right to clean and healthy waters would take precedence over the lower permitted rights that our state gives to polluters to pollute. Make no mistake, there's pollution in the state because the state allows it, either through its action or through its inaction. Also, the amendment may be used to sue state executive agencies for harm or threatened harm. This is our legal tool to hold the state accountable for the harm that it allows. It's very narrow. You'll notice this is not like the Pennsylvania amendment or even like the Montana one. If you are going to amend the Florida Constitution, law says it must be very narrowly focused on a single subject. In this case, we're narrowly focused on water, and we're narrowly focused on the executive branch. If we added the legislature, if we said we can go out after corporations, the Supreme Court would say, no good. You went outside the boundaries of a single rule, and they would not find the amendment lawful. So, important point, because as I've been talking about this for a few years, I have detected some cynicism on the part of Florida voters. Oh, we have passed citizens initiatives before, comfortably, even overwhelmingly, only to see the state legislature pull the rug out from underneath what the people have said we want. The people who wrote the language of this amendment wasn't me. They anticipated that the legislature would attempt to undermine this. Think back to what I told you about Orange County, how swiftly the legislature stepped in to preempt such authority of local governments. They would not have done that if they did not fear just how effective a rights-based approach to environmental protection would be. So the crafters of this language anticipated that the legislature would try to undermine it. It is almost virtually impossible. But I would never say never. They're going to do their best, but it was written in such a way that that would be virtually impossible. This is a fundamental right, not like those other initiatives. It's also self-executing. It's not dependent upon the legislature to create any other laws to put it in effect. When voters go to vote in 2024, the moment it passes, it's law. It's in effect. So, it shall be unlawful and considered a violation of the right in clean and healthy waters for a state executive agency to harm or threaten to harm Florida waters by action or inaction. Let me give you some concrete examples for us down here. Lake Okeechobee, which Cody spoke about at length. They release water down here because the level in the lake is too high. We come down, we start suffering blue-green algae blooms and exacerbated red tides. With this amendment, we can take the DEP to court because that's a violation. They're harming our water quality down here. What would happen? We would present, both sides would present their scientific information. Cody presented a lot of science. We know a lot of science. In fact, we know a lot of the things we already need to do. You remember when Governor DeSantis came in, he created the Blue-Green Algae Task Force? Florida's best and brightest minds regarding water quality down here. They came up with 32 recommendations, science-based recommendations. Take a guess what percentage of those recommendations have now been implemented 5 years later? Well, not that bad. 12%. In the last legislative session, there was legislation sponsored to ensure that more of those recommendations would be implemented. Did that go anywhere? No. I wish that science dictated the actions that we take and the laws we write and the regulations that are crafted regarding water quality. But that is not the way the system works, not often enough. So we would present information. This is not difficult. I believe there are 40 water basins surrounding Lake O. 32 of them are not meeting water quality standards as we speak. That could be because there's not enough enforcement going on. There's not enough monitoring going on. My understanding is some of the tools that they use to measure the water quality are scientifically suspect. Whatever the reasons are, the court takes a look at it, and it could compel the DEP or whatever other state agencies are involved to do what they must do to start cleaning up the water. Important case in New York. The first under their new green amendment. There was a landfill, second biggest landfill in the state. It was the cause of thousands of community complaints, noxious fumes, making people sick and stuff. DEP did nothing up there. When they got the green amendment, they took it to court. The DEP asked the court to dismiss the lawsuit. Court said, no, we're not doing that. And after looking at all the information, the court said, state agencies do not have the discretion to ignore the Constitution whenever they want to. The people have this fundamental right. It's your responsibility to make sure that right doesn't get violated. Our courts can compel our DEP to do what it must do to protect our fundamental right to clean and healthy waters upon which our health, our economies, the wildlife that we cherish all depend upon. That's how, Governor DeSantis' $3.5 billion package. I hope it does everything that he says it's going to do. But Cody, correct me if I'm mistaken, but most of that is about cleaning up the polluted water before we send it south. Not very much of that is about stopping the pollution going into the lake to begin with. That's the ultimate solution. Stop polluting the lake. I also want to talk about a subject that I was talking about earlier with the Collier County Waterkeeper. And this one is a big problem for us, the loss of wetlands. We have known there are cases here in Lee County, Collier County. You saw the very dramatic slides that Cody showed, 1960, then 2020, boom, wetlands are vanishing. When I moved down Cape Coral, I was told, Joe, do not worry about those hundreds of acres of wetlands behind your house. No one's ever going to develop them. Well, guess what? Now the property owner wants to develop them. And we are doing what communities everywhere do. We're putting up a good fight. I hope that our DEP does not issue a permit to build on those wetlands. I can't be confident the DEP will do that. I hope that our city council says, no, we're not going to let this property owner, we're not going to accept an amendment to our city comprehensive plan, changing the zoning from preserve to mixed use land use. But we can't be confident of that either. If both those entities give this a thumbs up, there's very, very little we can do. But if we had this amendment, we could. That's an obvious violation of our fundamental right to clean and healthy waters, which include aquatic ecosystems, which include wetlands. We can take it to court. We can make the case pretty darn easily that this is a fundamental right. Should the DEP issue a permit, the court could order it to rescind the permit. We've lost I said, no state has lost more wetlands than we have. We have lost 9.3 million acres of wetlands. With what tool do we draw a line and say enough is enough? Go build somewhere else, make your profit somewhere else. This is the tool to do that. I spoke about that and I don't want to take too much time. Oh, well, maybe I will for a second, because this is a good example of how what we usually do doesn't work. This has to do with the recent bill to use radioactive material in roadways. 20 organizations, including Center for Biological Diversity, wrote to Governor DeSantis, say, please, Governor, do not sign this. EPA already tells us that this is going to harm both ground and surface waters. Governor DeSantis signed the bill. With our amendment, we could very easily make the case, this is a violation. Hello, federal EPA says it's going to pollute our waters. This is not constitutional. So that's our website. I went through a lot of things very quickly. We've got great FAQs, general FAQs, legal FAQs. I urge you to go and read them. We've got over 200 organizations, most Waterkeeper chapters. And let me show a little bit more, League of Women Voters and many others who are supporting us. In the end, it is a numbers game. We are purely grassroots. We have to get 900,000 signed and verified petitions by the end of this year to qualify. That is a Herculean task, purposely made so by our legislature over the last 10, 20 years. We have collected just about 90,000. That is all. I want to say, though, I think that's pretty darn good, really, for a purely volunteer operation. Like, people give up their time going out in the streets, at events and such, collecting petitions. We tell people, go to the website, download the petition, sign it out, mail it in. Unfortunately, that's not easy enough for most people. Nothing is as good as one person standing in front of another saying, you ready for some clean water? Can you take 2 minutes to sign the petition? That works. Our request here, my request here today, everybody sign a petition. I'm guessing, because you guys have been supporting us for months already, that most everybody here has already signed. But I would ask, take 5 blank petitions with you today and get 5 other people to sign it. And please, don't just give them the blank petition and say, mail it in. Nah, wait there, have them sign it. Take that petition. You get all 5 and you mail them in. This way we know it's going to happen. Can we still make this in time? I maintain that at least for another few weeks, this is possible. We live in a time when things can go viral. At this point, we need things to go viral. And earlier on, we were talking about word of mouth. That is a great way to make it happen. But even if we don't make it this time, the effort is not dying. I think over the past months, we have been pretty successful in planting the expectation in Floridians' minds that we deserve a constitutional right to clean water down here. And 200 organizations, lots of influential people, it keeps on building. Years ago, you had 4 or 5 years to get the required number of petitions. Now we have 2. But that doesn't mean that we start from scratch. Not when so many people know about us, not when there's so much support, not when Floridians are getting increasingly frustrated with the state of our waters.
So if we don't get that number by December, are those still good for the next effort?
No. Regarding petition count, we start from 0. But we now have a statewide structure. We have hundreds of organizations and businesses that know about us. I don't see Calusa Waterkeeper suddenly saying, no, we're not going to support that amendment anymore. I think they'll support it just as much as they ever did. So anything else? Let me see. Sign a petition, give 5 family members or friends to sign. Oh. Get your church involved if you belong to a faith community. We have been making an outreach to them. If there is one community of Floridians who can actually make this happen, barring things going viral, it is the millions of Floridians who live faith-based lives. Every religion believes in good stewardship. Everybody gets that you protect the environment and you're protecting your neighbor. We have done some petition gathering at churches. If you belong to a faith community, try to make it happen. Contact me, we'll contact them, and we can make that work. We'd be very happy to get other organizations involved. If you liked what you heard today and you say, hey, Joe, can you come and talk to the other organization? I would love to do that. And we have been getting by on very, very little money. You can always use money. Everything has been grassroots. We don't have any big pockets behind us. Everything has been relatively small stuff. So I am happy to take questions.
What more would- write a letter at the end. I wrote my letter at the end. I encourage everybody else to write a letter, you know.
That is a great idea. A letter to editors sections are the most popular sections in newspapers. Hundreds of thousands of people get to read them. It's free and papers want to run those sorts of things. Something that is, you know, other than vitriolic political bashing and stuff. Yes.
To, you know, the board there and see if, you know, they can. All residents.
Terrific. Yes. You can. No. Post office will bounce that one. We do have a number of petition locations throughout the state. I think we have, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 of them throughout the state. Do not have a printer and it's difficult, and obviously you can't print it out. And we have an interactive map on our website and it shows you where they are. And you can go down there and sign the petition. You could leave it with them and they get picked up periodically. Yes, Sue?
For those who are not familiar with practice, could you explain that in-
Okay, it's a little off my expertise, but I know enough that fracking has made the nation a super big oil producer once again. For a number of years, we've fallen behind. No longer. Through technological innovation, they're able to go down into the ground and they pump in water. They say clean water, and they put a juice of all sorts of terrible chemicals in it. They pump it into the ground, and this somehow pushes out the oil, and they get lots and lots of oil. Also left with billions of gallons of terribly toxic water. The methane comes when they're burning off methane. I really don't know why that's happening. Maybe it's unavoidable. But methane is many times more damaging to our climate than is carbon. So I'm not an authority on that in particular, so that's about as deep as I'm ready to go. Okay. Anything else? Well, again, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Joe, and thank all of you. Our speakers really have given us a lot to think about and a lot to do, and it's very critical for us to work on these issues and to get those petitions signed. you made some recommendations during the presentations. Are there any last minute ideas for the league, or you also have the opportunity of working with our leaders in environment and climate, and Clarion and Adrian are both on the Zoom, and I also would love for you to reach out to them. Any last questions? One or two? None?
Maybe this one. So what objections do people have for not signing the petition if we get objections?
The question is objections. I've not heard, personally, I've never heard an objection, but Joe, maybe you have some.
Two things come up. First, people say, isn't this going to open up the floodgates for litigation? You want to have lawsuits all over the place. Not going to happen. How do we know that? It hasn't happened in Pennsylvania. It hasn't happened in Montana. Actually, there are only a handful of lawsuits under Green Amendments every year. They're very, very expensive proposition. There will not be, there will not be a whole bunch of lawsuits. The other thing, want my taxes to go up? Well, number one, how many billions of dollars are we paying for food and water now? The $3.5 billion package from the governor, how much money is that? That's our money. And I would also say, it doesn't cost us a penny. Polluted water does. The polluters pollute, we end up paying for it. This can change that. In the long run, we will save, not cost.
Anyone else? Thank you. I guess I've hit the right people. I never get objections. They're just like, yes, I want clean water. So again, thank you to the speakers for their important work and for sharing information today. You for participating. I hope you will engage on clean water issues as well as other issues important to the league in the future. You can join us. As I mentioned earlier, Amy Wolf is membership chair. You can join online. And if you belong to another organization, you can partner with us, and you can also partner with Calusa Waterkeepers and the Right to Clean Water to support the water issues. And individually, there's many opportunities for us to speak up in Lee County and in Florida, as we all know, living here every day. So I encourage you to be informed, to make your voices heard with elected officials and at the ballot box, and engage in the decisions that impact you on a day-to-day basis. We do have some other educational events coming up. Jacqueline, I don't know if you can get the slide. The next event will be on affordable housing in Lee County, which is, it's slide number 7. No? Okay. Well, the next event will be the first November 4th on affordable and attainable housing back in this room and also on Zoom. And we, another critical issue in Lee County, and we have a lot of information to share on that as well. And all of our events are posted on our website since we can't put the slide up right now. And then if you are not currently on our email distribution list, please let us know that you'd be interested. And there was a sign-up sheet at the registration desk. You also can sign up on our website for that. Please take the clean water petitions, and the right to abortion petitions are up here. You can also take a supply of those. If you haven't signed that one, please do so. And I forgot to mention another initiative of the league is returning citizens, and we do have information to assist and lawyers on call to assist citizens who have lost their right to vote because of a felony, and they can get assistance through the league and through other organizations. So there's information at this table up here on those opportunities. The league will be having a board meeting in this room immediately following. You're all invited to attend if you would like to. Oh, the educational events are up now. And any last comments or recommendations for the league? Again, I thank our speakers. You've certainly given us a lot, and thank you for all your work.